Greetings and bienvenue, crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Basically, crawlers is a catch-all term for anything humanoid, pale, and spooky. And their appearance generally looks that way as well, but with some smaller differences in patterns and appearance. I hypothesize that these creatures live within cave dwellings, abandoned areas, and just general secluded wilderness, as that is generally where sightings occur. From my encounter with one, that's where I encountered it, was on a secluded plot of land that my grandfather owned while I was working with cattle. All right, a few people have asked me to post my encounter, so here we go. This happened in January of 2020. I was 17 and in high school. My grandfather is a cattle farmer and a business owner, and he hired me to feed cows for him after school. Because I was in sports, I would leave the school and the ball field after practice, and my grandfather's properties were about 30 minutes out of town, and around 20 minutes between each property. By the time I had gotten to what we will call the 80, it was around 7 or 8 at night, and the middle of winter it was dark and cold. The way the system worked is that I fill up buckets at the farm at his house, and then drive to each farm with a designated amount of feed I needed to bring with me to feed the cows. And in the time I spent filling and putting up buckets, I had forgotten to grab the key to the gate. And so when I arrived at the 80 acres, I realized this. So I got out and started handing buckets over the fence and carried them 2 at a time to the feed troughs. While walking, I was whistling Be Happy, just the tune itself. Looking back with the knowledge I have now, whether or not the legends are true, it wasn't a good idea to identify myself like that out there in the woods. When I finished, I walked back to the truck, and when I hopped the fence and was about to open the door, when I heard a noise behind me, very quiet. But it was a quiet night, and I heard it coming from the adjacent property. It sounded similar to the sound someone makes when having never learned to whistle, the air blowing and every once in a while getting a slight whistle through their lips. I listened for a while and thought that it was odd, but I couldn't think about it much. I moved on and headed to the next farm to feed. Coming over 4 days a week, I did the same thing every day. Besides forgetting the key, I came back and would feed the cows at the 80. I noticed that during the week the cows would not come to the troughs when called. So I would just fill up the troughs and move on, because I didn't feel like trying to find them on the 80-acre property. Every time I would come back to the truck, I would hear noises coming from the adjacent property, more whistling. Through the days, I noticed that it was slowly progressing, as it would when someone would try and learn to whistle, until eventually on Thursday, it was as loud as someone cattle whistling. The whistle you see in movies and real life, the very loud whistle when someone puts 2 fingers in their mouth to project the sound. That night, I went home and lay in bed, and I thought about the whistling phenomenon that was happening when I was doing my job. I noticed that it had progressed from Monday, and by Thursday it was loud enough to fully grab my attention, as if someone was trying to do that in general. And then I also noticed that it was in the tune of Be Happy, like how I had done on Monday. It unnerved me, but I didn't want to put more thought into it and chalked it up to a mockingbird or some other bird. Friday was the day that everything hit the fan, so to speak. When I arrived at the gate, I had the keys with me. That day had been particularly hard, and so I was frustrated to begin with. And when I was trying to get the correct key on the key ring, I dropped the keys into some tall grass by the gate. I lost them in the dark in the grass, and so I grunted frustrated and said, "Damn it." After finding the keys, I did my job and came back to the truck and was getting ready to leave when I heard a noise from the adjacent property. It sounded identical to a calf in distress, or being attacked by something. My grandfather would move new calves he bought or some from his properties to this adjacent property as well. I didn't want to investigate the sounds, but I felt that it was my job to do so. I grabbed my phone and I made my way down and across the road. I hopped the fence and started to hike upwards towards where the sound was coming from. And as I was making my way, the noises made by the unknown thing slowly started to change. They went from sounding more cow-like to more of a guttural and scratcher-sounding noise. Groaning would best describe it. I slowed my pace due to this, but I didn't stop moving. Eventually, I was about halfway to the top where the sounds were coming from, when the sounds changed again. Whatever was above me on the hill started to do what sounded like speaking. It sounded like someone who had never learned English or language for that matter, trying to sound out a word. It started to say the word "damn it" over and over, slowly sounding it out in the most guttural and raspy voice I had ever heard then and since then. Still squatting, it stared at me, and I got a pretty good look at it. Squatting, I estimate it was 5 feet tall. The face was elongated. The facial features were human, but they were contorted, longer than normal, and everything was stretched in a way that is hard to describe. Its skin had looked leathery, and it was grayish-white. It was stretched over its bones, and its stomach was sucked into its body, and it had a deep rib cage. Its arms were very long, and it looked like it had 2 sets of knees. Its hands and fingers were abnormally long, and ended in what looked like claws or protruding bones. While we were staring at each other, we didn't move, and then slowly and without making a sound, it stood without taking its eyes off me, and then turned its whole body towards me. The neck was long and swung with the body, but the head didn't move. After this, it toward over me. I'm 6'1", and it felt that this creature in front of me stood above me by 2 feet at least. I was only 10 yards from it, and we stayed that way for only a moment. But my adrenaline was going off, and it felt like forever that I was being stared down by this thing. And that's when it moved its mouth. Its mouth was along as its face width and went from what looked like cheek to cheek. It opened its mouth and said, "Damn it," back to me in my own voice. It mimicked me almost perfectly. The tone, inflection, pitch, everything was identical. But it felt wrong. Something was off, and it was enough to where that broke the staring contest, and I turned and ran. I ran faster than I have ever ran before. I came down the hill and vaulted over the fence, hopped in the truck and peeled out of there. I did come back after that from my job, and I did hear the whistling again. It's been years since that encounter, and I still can't really tell what to make of it. It brought me into the world of paranormal research, and I've interviewed over the phone and in person many people, whether they be military personnel, business owners, or your average Joe. A lot of people have seen things like this or something similar, and it's something that racks my brain often. Thoughts/X/.
I live near downtown Philadelphia. I always enjoyed night walks, even though it was not recommended in my neighborhood. But it was the best way for me to find my peace after a long, hectic day at work. I miss those walks because I stopped taking them after I saw it. It alerted me to its presence while I was walking between 2 buildings. There was a quick snap, like a branch was breaking. When I turned to look, I saw its limbs. The long, somewhat humanoid arms were stretching out from behind the side of a dumpster. I could see the extended fingers with the clawed ends. I wouldn't say that I was afraid, but I did suddenly feel out of place, as if I had accidentally opened the door into somebody else's house. I sheepishly said, "Hello." The arms jerked suddenly, and there was another series of loud snaps from behind the dumpster. I realized that the snapping sounds were coming from the creature's limbs. That was when the fear crept in, but I was strangely frozen in place. As the claws returned from the shadows, they curled over the rim of the dumpster and slowly began tapping against the metal body. The creature pulled itself upright, its head peeking over the edge. It looked vaguely human-like and was shaped like a man's. The mouth hung open as if it was trying to take a breath. Then it slid back, ducking out of sight yet again. After several seconds had passed, the humanoid leaped out from its hiding place. It hunkered on the ground. Its legs were as long as its arms, and the entire body was hairless and gaunt. It looked like a corpse. It then made a sudden lunge toward me. I ran as quickly as I could while hearing the snarling and shrieks that were coming from behind me. I heard it running on the ground, but then realized that it was running on the walls. It scurried along the sides of the building like a spider. My only hope was to reach my front door before it reached me. As I approached my residence, I fumbled with my keys but was able to unlock the door and slide into the foyer. The creature crashed against the door and banged on the frame for a few seconds before falling silent. I quickly made my way to the back door and made sure it was locked. I walked back to the front foyer. I watched the front door for what must have been hours. I knew it was still there. I could hear the barely audible breathing as it waited for me to make the mistake of checking if it had left. Eventually, the sun started to break through the darkness. I pressed my ear against the door, but I heard nothing. I slowly pulled the door open. The coast was clear. The creature was gone. That was the last time I took a walk in my neighborhood at night. I only walk in the daylight, as I keep a vigilant eye open for anything unusual. I have no idea what that humanoid was or what it wanted from me. but I wasn't going to take any chances on finding out.
I only have a kind of general knowledge of them. In terms of classification, think of crawlers more like a genus than a species. Like I said, they can vary pretty drastically. Some can be shorter, some are covered in fur, some have no face, etc. Shadow people are a very rudimentary form of crawler, usually existing in a domestic setting, and kind of embody that fear of the dark thing that kids have. They feed off of fear, so they'll do things that instill fear in you, building it slowly over time. Stuff like hearing disembodied voices, tapping on windows, looking at you from around corners, etc. The wild crawlers, like the ones that live in national parks, backcountry areas that people see Innawoods, are based more on adult fears and typically more dangerous. They have their little places they hide out in when the sun is up and come out and hunt during the twilight/dark hours. They're typically kind of like cats. When it comes to predation, they'll stalk, try to close the gap and attack quickly, go for the throat and eat through the stomach. And yes, they eat people. Not all do. Some are content to just feed off of fear, doing their little horror movie tricks. The clothes and shoes that people find in those 411 sometimes are leftovers, what the crawler spits out after it's eaten someone. Like I said, one orifice, the mouth. Also, a crawler that's consumed human flesh tends to become more sapient and intelligent and fare better under the sun. It's kind of like them not being reliant on faith anymore. Kind of like in folklore how monsters eat people. They can mimic the voices of their last victims. Stories of hearing a person calling out "help me" on repeat, in the same tone over and over again, to lure the next person away. And also, their remains are like ash and dust once they die.
Yep, very true. I haven't experienced this, but I heard of some experiences where people kill them and they just disintegrate into a fine powder. Story that comes to mind is of some teenage anon with an SKS that wandered into an abandoned cabin, went into the basement or cellar. On the steps leading down to it, the creature revealed itself and lunged at him. Anon fell on his back on the stairs and Mag dumped all 10 rounds onto the thing. The thing laid there for about 15 seconds, then disintegrated into a fine powder. Sorry for the rambly post, I just had to put it out there.
What was it? I want to state a few things. This incident takes place around 1 to 2 years ago. Initially, I wanted to post my encounter somewhere online, but the more I thought about this encounter, the more it consumed me and my thoughts. Sometime after the fact, I figured the best thing for myself was to try and forget. This didn't work, so instead I'll do my best to lay out what I saw. I live in North Carolina. It's not a small city by any means, but it's a highway town at its core. I've lived here for 10+ years. On the night in question, I was with my ex. We'll refer to her as Z. This was right around the time when the plague restrictions had yet to be fully lifted, so Z invited me for a walk. She was finishing up her online courses for the semester, one being physical activity. So we'd often walk around her neighborhood to reach a daily amount of steps. Anyways, we head out on this walk. It's around 7 to 8 p.m., so on our way out the sun is already setting. We stick to the street, as it isn't a sidewalk and we're just walking through the neighborhood. I've been down this area hundreds of times. I drove there nearly every day to be with Z during the plague. It's just your average single-story, cookie cutter, every house looks identical in the neighborhood. On our way back to the house it's dusk. A weird time of day, especially this evening. It was almost a gray-looking atmosphere, but still illuminated enough to see the streets. Z is on a phone call for the entirety of the way back, so I'm just taking in my surroundings and waiting for the walk to be finished. That's when I see it. Whatever this thing was. About 3 houses down, mid-jump, arms and legs fully outstretched and leaping across the street. It lands on the other side in an instant, with barely enough time to register that anything had even happened at all. At the time it felt like a hallucination. Something fiction that my brain had just conjured up out of boredom, or lack of visual content. It happened so quickly, but this flash frame is burned into my memory now and is something that I'll probably never forget. It was huge, and 100% silent. I only caught sight of it flying across the street and landing underneath a car. It was fully outstretched and took up almost the entirety of the street. Even with its hands on the ground, its rear legs were still stretched from the jump and extended far beyond the halfway point of this two-lane road. I can only guess the size of this thing was from 10 to 20 feet in length. It looked extremely thin, beyond anorexic, but startlingly human from the waist up. 100% dark gray. Its arms seemed to be car length, with large claws, and its legs were bowed in a way that reminded me of a dog. The only feature I couldn't make out was its face. It seemed completely black, but scarily human. Again, at the time I had no idea if what I saw was some sort of weird animal or just a hallucination. Even so, I kept my eyes glued to where I had seen this hallucination land. As I got closer and closer to the car, I almost wanted to freak out. Z was still on the phone though, so I decided to keep quiet and inspect the car for myself as we walked by. I turned my head as we slowly passed by the vehicle. At this point, I'm convincing myself that what I had seen couldn't be possible, but I just couldn't bring myself to peer and look underneath that car. As we walk away, I turn back a few times, really trying to process if I lost my mind for a moment or not. By the time we get home, I feel almost embarrassed. Did I just have a stare down with a car for absolutely no reason? By the time we walk inside Z's house, she's off the phone. We were kind of bummed that our walk was void of conversation, so we just catch up and converse for the next half hour. The hallucination had almost completely left my mind at this point. We just ended up going about our usual business. Honestly, I was just happy to be spending time with my partner. I was ready to accept that what had happened earlier was nothing more than my imagination.
Have these crawler things been known to appear in conjunction with other things? Does crawler only refer to big things? I might have an encounter. Might have been something else though. Background on the area. I live in a small, post-rural farming town with a population of roughly 80,000. I wouldn't call it remote. However, there are parts of this town that remain pretty undeveloped or very farm-centric. 2 a.m. New Year's Day, my friend and I are walking back to my place from a New Year's Eve get-together. About a block from my house, we see a small transparent humanoid dart across the road, from our side to the other, and disappear into a bush. Should note that behind this bush is a pipe leading to some kind of waterway. I guess I'd describe it as similar to the Predator's camouflage, but less ripple-y, if that makes sense. We see this thing and just run top speed the rest of the way to my house. Over the course of the next few nights, I saw a white thing around my house. 1. Looking out my bedroom window, ground floor, I saw the back end of something white disappear into the neighbor's dark driveway. Too dark to see. They had huge trees on their property that blocked the streetlights. 2. While looking out my window again, I did that a lot. I enjoy nighttime. Cool air, starry sky, all that cozy shit. I see a white shape on the other side of my hedges. The hedges weren't very full, so you could see through them a bit. It seemed to notice I could see it because it briskly walked away, crossing the street and heading off towards where my friend and I saw the little transparent thing. 3. While on the computer one night, I got a feeling of being watched. I looked over towards the kitchen window in time to see something white duck away from it. 4. The last time I saw it, I was in my room and heard the front gate, which was close to my bedroom window, shake. We had a chain link fence and gate, so you should probably know that sound. Thinking the raccoons were invading, I got up to scare them away. Upon sticking my head out the window, I see my cat chasing something small and white, but bigger than him, around the corner and out of sight. The white thing was small. I would have been taller than it had it squared up with me like the thing in OP's story did to him. However, it seemed muscular, at least in the rear section. When I saw it move into the neighbor's driveway, I only saw its ass. Seemed muscular, thick but not fat, no tail. Same view I had when I saw my cat chase it off. It seemed curious and timid, seeing as it was chased away by a fairly small cat, and fled when it noticed I could see it once. Assuming it was the same thing my friend and I had seen, we had spooked it then too. But then why was it never transparent in the later sightings? I don't know. That's why I wonder if it was two different things. It seemed to walk sort of hunched low. When it was running from my cat, it was on all fours. When I saw it in the neighbor's driveway, it seemed to be on all fours then too. The transparent thing was sort of hunched forward. However, in the hedge sighting, it walked fully upright.
So, I don't typically believe in this kind of stuff, but I had a very strange encounter a while back. I told my coworkers about it, and they insisted I had seen a rake. I've been researching since I had no idea what it was. It looks very similar to what I saw, except it's a fictional creature from a creepypasta. Just learned about that too, so I'm not sure what I saw. Anyway, I was driving home from work about a month or so ago and headed down this typically busy side street in Douglas County, Colorado, called Havana. It's close to Centennial Airport, in a business district, surrounded by apartments. It was about 1:30 a.m. and there wasn't much traffic, just a Jeep in front of me. As I drove around a bend in the road, where Dry Creek turns into Havana, I saw in my peripheral vision a figure to my right on the sidewalk standing between two small trees held up by wire supports. The creature stood kind of behind them. At first glance, I figured it was just a tall, slender dog, like a white greyhound or Great Dane. It escaped and seemed to bark at traffic on the sidewalk. I was traveling about 45 miles per hour when I passed, and it was dark out. But I noticed as I passed by, that it appeared to have a humanoid-shaped head with black eyes. It also had a bent-over hunched back, long slender legs, and an unusually wide mouth, like it was screaming or something. I thought to myself, yo, what was that? So I slowed down quickly to look back, and in my mirror, I saw the creature turn around and run off towards a fence/brick retaining wall on the other side of the sidewalk. But as it ran off, I saw how tall and slender the creature was. It seemed very pale, almost gray, with an anorexic and bony appearance. It also moved strangely, where its hind leg joints were inverted and bent in the opposite direction from its front legs. At that point, I was seriously creeped out. The Jeep in front of me had also slowed down, so I could only assume they saw it, too. We both continued driving as it was late/early and couldn't stop in the middle of a busy road. However, that situation really made my skin crawl. I checked my mirrors for the rest of the drive home. I debated if I should have called a non-emergency line to have an officer check it out, but I told myself they would think I was an idiot. Now, every night when I take that road, I look around to see if I can spot it again. I really want to believe it was just a dog. However, I can't stop thinking about how strange and quickly it moved with its backwards knees and how long and wide its mouth stretched. I haven't talked about this much except to some family and my coworkers because, frankly, it sounds ridiculous. I'm wondering what I saw. And if it's something I should talk about? Or should I pretend I never saw anything and move on with my life?
This happened in the Sierra Nevadas, in Yosemite Valley, California. It was a place that I'd been looking forward to hiking for a long time. I had prepared all my gear the previous night, double-checking everything. Water, food, tent, map, everything. I was just itching to get out there and explore. The sun's peeking up over the horizon and it's just so serene. Anyway, a few hours into the hike, I stopped to refuel, taking a bit of a breather. I found a nook near a stream. I'm settling down to eat and I hear this sound. First, I think it's probably a squirrel or something. But then the sound gets louder and heavier. Suddenly, I'm on alert. I'm no stranger to wildlife and I instantly knew that this was different. I can just feel it in my gut. So I decided to move towards it and check it out. I tread lightly trying to figure out the source of the sound and then I see this creature. It's not a bear, not a mountain lion, not anything that you would expect to see in the mountains. It was something different. This creature stood on its hind legs like a human but was much taller. The body was covered in these scales, like a lizard, but these were larger, almost like armor plating. There was also a dark green color, almost black in some places, and its limbs were muscular but lean, like a runner's but way more powerful. The head was the most striking part. It had these slanted almond-shaped eyes that glowed an eerie yellow. It didn't have a snout, more like a flat face. There were these slits where a nose should be and the mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth, but not like predators' teeth, more like rows of serrated knives, if that makes sense. I didn't see any wings or anything, but it had a long tail, almost as long as the body, like a kangaroo's tail. It had 4 fingers, but they were long and ended in these sharp curved claws. The thing I remember the most was that the creature moved so smoothly, like water flowing over rocks, almost graceful. You're probably thinking I'm pulling your leg or messing with you, but I swear this is exactly what I saw. This reptilian-like creature was some next-level, out-of-this-world kind of being. I had a good 5 minutes or so to just stare at the thing. It's standing there at the edge of the clearing just observing me, like it's trying to figure me out. It didn't seem hostile, I mean it was freaky as hell. I didn't want to provoke it. But instead of coming at me it just kind of mirrored me as I moved. It was like we were doing some weird kind of dance. I know it sounds nuts, but it was as if the creature was just as curious about me as I was about it. We stood there for what felt like hours, but I'm sure it was just a few minutes. At one point I could swear it made a sound like a low hum or something. I couldn't make much of it, but it didn't seem threatening. Then suddenly it turned and disappeared. I was in shock. I mean, what did I just witness? So now, at this point, there I was alone in the clearing with my heart pounding like a drum. I'm just standing there wondering if this really just happened. I was trying to process everything. I decided to follow in the direction where the creature went. I couldn't just let it go and I had to know more. As I moved closer to where it disappeared, I noticed these huge tracks on the ground. It was not anything I had ever seen in any guidebook. The air felt different too, almost electric. It felt charged and there was this energy around that I just can't explain. I pushed through the undergrowth following the tracks. It felt like I was in some kind of a dream or a movie, like at any moment I would just wake up back in my tent and it would all be over. But no, this was real and it was actually happening. I walked further into the woods. I noticed that the tracks became harder to find, then they started to disappear. It was like the creature had just vanished into thin air. I must have looked around for an hour or more, but there was no other sign of it. It was gone. But I swear to you that every time I closed my eyes that night I could see those eyes. Its form was burned into my memory. I still can't believe what I saw that day.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.